Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 seem to have fairly comparable beginnings, and yeah, these two games are trying to create entirely different feelings within the players. And there's no point bearing the lead. Fallout 3 instills a greater sense of disorientation, apprehension, and intrigue, while Fallout 4 creates a feeling of comfort, familiarity, and self-determination. Now, I'm certainly not going to pretend we all felt one specific way at the start of Fallout 3 and we all felt this notably different way at the start of Fallout 4, because that's just not true. What I do want to do though is discuss what led to these variations, and what elements of the start of these two games create these feelings. Right at the top, there's lots of reasons for these differences. Some of it's game mechanics, some of it's the actual narrative start of the game, and some of it's the context the two games were and are being played in. And this last thing is pretty significant, so let's start here. Fallout 4 was one of the most anticipated games of all time, just straight up. Bethesda was in its golden age. Its last 3 games had won Game of the Year. During this time, it was arguably more heralded and revered than any gaming company has ever been. The hype train was chock-a-block full as the release date closened for what legitimately could become the greatest open-world RPG ever created. And at this time, it wasn't even crazy to say that Fallout 4 had a chance of becoming the greatest game ever created. All of this is to say is that the vast majority of people playing Fallout 4 not only knew what the game was, but very likely had played previous games from the series and were ready and researched for when they cracked open their fresh new Fallout 4 case. This is distinctively not the experience most people had with Fallout 3. Now, of course, there were people that had played the original games or for other reasons were keen to get this new iteration, like those who wanted to see what the creators of Elder Scrolls Oblivion would do next. But the majority of players slipping on their Vault 101 jumpsuits had not only never played any Fallout games, the last one having been released only on PC 10 years earlier all the way back in 1998, most players in 2008 had never even heard of the Fallout series. This creates two incredibly different starting points for most players. One where it's one of the most popular game series of all time, with fans living in a sense of anticipation for months, if not years, and a completely juxtaposed position where people are sliding into their Xbox 360s a third game of a series for a franchise they don't know anything about. This difference in cultural understanding and institutionalized knowledge about the Fallout franchise by itself is interesting, but not really going to create the distinctive different emotional states the start of the respective games create. The reason I've noted it though is because the two games' introductions fully embrace and weaponize this varied mentality. Fallout 3's beginning is written with the expectation that you don't know anything about the game, while Fallout 4 approaches it from the perspective that you are coming back to the series. So let's look at the actual beginnings of these games and see how they approach this idea. Fallout 3, knowing you don't know anything about the series, just straight up gives you a 4-minute lore dump explaining the whole alternate history thing, the nuclear holocaust, and finishes describing what the vaults are and how you live inside of one. Then it incredibly subtly puts on a metaphorical masterclass suggesting that you, the player, might be new to the whole world of Fallout. See if you can spot the imagery they're going for here as they introduce your character. Compare this to Fallout 4, where the introduction describes the story of an individual experiencing the world of Fallout, then it dumps you in front of a mirror as a fully formed adult, where it says, hey, you know that cinematic you just watched? Yeah, that's you. Make the version of you that you want to experience Fallout. These are obviously really different strategies for getting your player into the in-game world. Fallout 3's intro is all about catching you up on the relevant details while getting you curious about the world. What's going on? Who are these people? Where am I? Much of it is about getting the player to ask questions that will make them want to explore the world of Fallout and find out. Fallout 4, on the other hand, isn't really making you ask any questions. It's much more about giving you the context for this specific character, the starting blocks for which you'll build off when creating and living out your Fallout RPG dream. The main question you'll likely be asking is a meta playstyle one. What sort of character am I gonna build? A key indication that these are the desired goals of the game's beginning is the start. Fallout 3's intro is so much longer than Fallout 4's. There's multiple sequences where you have in-depth conversations with people, get a bit of knowledge here and there about the world, and just sort of get situated into the mentality of the Fallout franchise. Meanwhile, Fallout 4 gives you some exposition, but it feels half-hearted and perfunctory, mostly for the few new players. But pretty quickly, it puts you in the vault, then lets you leave the vault, then goes, hey, here's the new world of Fallout you've all been waiting for. go for your life. So this sort of explains the difference between the intrigue and mystery you'll feel when booting up Fallout 3 and the sense of desire for self-actualization with Fallout 4, and the excitement and anticipation for the cool badassery you'll get to do. So let's turn our attention to the sense of disorientation you're likely to experience with Fallout 3 versus the sense of comfort Fallout 4 wants you to feel. Now, if Fallout 3 was your first Fallout game and Fallout 4, well, wasn't, then these things will be inherent to a degree. But once again, the games absolutely recognize that players are going to have these perceptions and then amplify these feelings purposefully. I should also say, if you've played Fallout 3 for 15 years and are whipping out the 20th run, you're probably going to feel pretty comfortable with the game. Much of what I'm talking about is in the context of the time the games were released and people's first playthroughs. But even still, these feelings track over the years and across multiple playthroughs. With that probably unnecessary and weirdly deep into the video disclaimer, these two games have really different approaches to making you feel at home. Fallout 3 has a really long intro where it establishes you have lived your whole life in a single vault, and you even play through your life at 3 different ages before it starts in the de facto present day. You learn about the geography and vibe of your home. You learn about the other members of the community and create relationships with them, especially your father. So when you wake up at age 19 with sirens blaring and your friend telling you shit's fucked and that your father has done some crazy shit and now you're in trouble, you run around with a sense of panic and you don't understand what's happening. Then you're being asked to make massive decisions with really small amounts of information, and oh fuck, you are 19 straight up killing a dude you've known your entire life because everything is crazy and it sort of seems justifiable. Maybe you run that murder game back and kill again, but guess what? Your one friend is not fucking happy you killed her dad, and then you get fucking banished. You're out of there, dog. And if you try to go back to your home, the only place you've ever lived, the game says fuck you. So now you have to look out into the world of Fallout, a dull, grey, washed out wasteland that seems cold and unpleasant, and you just have to figure out what you need to do. And the game's like, go find your dad, I guess, the person which just upended your entire life without telling you anything, and you're just out here in this shithole world. You don't just need to survive, which you've been told is near impossible, you also need to figure out what to do, where to go, but also what the fuck is even going on in the world as a whole. It's confusing, disorienting, it pulls the rug from underneath you, and you're just forced to deal with the world head on. And you really feel like a teenager whose life has been destroyed, who's been made to make massive decisions which were more significant and consequence heavy than anything you've done before, while also not letting you know what the short or long-term outcomes of those choices will be, or even if they do matter. And it feels hard and brutal and uncaring, and that's the world of Fallout. Fallout 3's beginning is an up and down excellent start to a game, probably a good blueprint for Fallout 4 to follow. Sure, but what if they did the opposite, like the entire opposite? In Fallout 4, you start in your house and things are nice and cushy. Then they're admittedly not so great and you enter the vault. You watch your spouse die and your son gets snatched, which is lame, but not super impactful because you haven't spent anywhere near as much time with them as you did with the characters in Fallout 3. And also because it all happens in a cutscene rather than you playing through that experience. Then you wake up and make your way through the vault, doing what really feels like a basic tutorial, and all too soon you are back to the place you were just 10 minutes ago. But this time it's all post-apocalyptic. Oh no. And what does the game tell you to do? Go home, of course. So you stroll back home to your old town, which is in pretty good shape all things considered, and guess who's there? Your old robot friend. How cool. And he'll even accompany you through the game right from the very start so you can have some sense of connection to your old life from the very beginning. And yeah, friends are great and all, but then the game tells you about the base system. So instead of feeling homeless with no direction, no connections to the world, and no real skills to deal with it, you're back at your old family home with a friend from your past life, and you're able to, and encouraged to, spend quite a long time building your home back up and making yourself a little protective area that you can come to back at any time to heal, dump items, relax, and so on. Even more so, your character is a heralded award-winning soldier rather than a teenager who's been in an underground cult for their entire life. So you feel like, yeah, I'm probably equipped and capable of dealing with the terrors of this world. Fallout 4 wants you to feel 100% coddled and comfortable. It wants you to know that you are safe here and you're totally free to get acquainted with the controls. You can even get a rucksack full of all the useful items you'd need in the early game, so right from the start you're equipped to tackle the treacherous wasteland of old Boston town. It even places you in the top left of the map in arguably the nicest part of the entire world. Unlike Fallout 3, which just places you on the map somewhere, coming out of a literal hole in the side of a cliff, looking over a dreary as fuck landscape. I'm not really trying to make value judgments about which is better. I'm just trying to point out these two games are so actively trying to create vastly different and to a degree counterposed feelings at the start of the game. And I think it's really interesting because in a lot of ways, Fallout 4's intro mirrors Fallout 3's so significantly. The last area I want to talk about is one major mechanical difference that really changes the feel on a literal level, this being the controls for the two games. Fallout 4 made the choice to adopt a control scheme that reflects many of the other first and third person shooters of the era. The exact same classic control scheme we still use today and has become almost entirely ubiquitous in gaming. The advantage of this is whenever you pick up a game which has gunplay, you basically know exactly how to play. This allows for your skills to become much more transferable. If you're good at shooting guns in Call of Duty or Fortnite, then you'll probably be pretty good at shooting guns in Fallout 4 and vice versa, because they all essentially use the same control scheme. This change went hand in hand with the game moving to more of an actual shooter game over a survival RPG. What all of this means though is that when players picked up Fallout 4 and started playing, they had experience with the playstyle and were able to feel like a fully trained soldier, because to a degree, they were. Fallout 3 didn't have this. No, Fallout 3 has what we would classically call bad controls that feel quote unquote shit to play. This is in large part because Fallout 3 came out slightly before the FPS control scheme revolution, which was in full effect by Fallout 4. The ubiquitifying of FPS controls is actually a concept I've made an entire video for, which is coming out soon. Back in 2008 though, Modern Warfare 2, the game that really helped cement this control scheme as the standard, was a year away, and as such, Fallout 3 was existing at the end of the Wild West period of control schemes, back when games would sort of do whatever the fuck they wanted. What this meant for the feeling of playing was more or less it was hard to actually be good at playing Fallout 3 from a combat perspective, especially at first when you're literally learning how to play the game, and you're wondering why this game doesn't have a proper zoom function. So for many players, diving into combat and plowing through your first room of raiders in the church feels really familiar. It's a classic, oh, I'm a super soldier type, going through a dungeon, wiping the floor with NPCs. While Fallout 3's combat is much more disincentivized, as it generally just feels icky and unfun to do, while also being really unpredictable and hard. This is especially true as low points in the various guns means your character is actually just dog shit at shooting with guns, something which is unavoidable at low levels. Like, you can point the crosshair directly at an enemy and shoot, but the bullets may or may not go there, while your character's raw abilities in Fallout 4 are only tied to your own skill. So if you're just goated and amazing at popping heads, you can confidently chuck the game on legendary difficulty and then body every encounter from your first minute with the game. Now I should say Fallout 4's combat is so much better and more fun, and I'm glad they changed it. However, it means, much like most of the rest of the game, Fallout 4 just feels like something you understand more intuitively, and is a world you just feel more naturally capable of navigating, and in a literal and metaphorical sense, you can control more effectively. While Fallout 3 basically makes you feel the opposite. It's sluggish, randomly punitive in an incomprehensible way, and makes you feel much more beholden to the game. Throughout this video, I haven't really talked about what is better too much, and the reason for that is I don't really think these differences are something you can quantify like that. Both of these games create entirely different feelings early on, and both are actively and deliberately trying to do this. I think this is especially interesting because they don't just do this on a narrative level or through game design. Much of the decision making that informed the choices that Bethesda made is derived from how players are going to approach it in relation to how much they know about it and how much experience they have with the Fallout series. Whether you like one better than the other is more or less a preference, and I can personally say I think Fallout 4 is a much better game, even though I think the ideology Fallout 3 instills at the beginning of the game is way more fascinating and effective at getting you into the world at Fallout. While generally the beginning is just leagues ahead of Fallout 4, whose introduction is overall pretty much a huge shrug. Either way, I thought this would be an interesting topic to dissect because some of the rhetoric around these two beginnings is that they're parallel. Something that is certainly true to a degree in that you leave a vault, but I've always found the two to be incredibly different because Fallout 3 spends so much time drumming up a sense of mystery about the world, wants you to feel uncomfortable uncomfortable and in certain ways wants you to feel helpless to the whims of the game, while Fallout 4 wants you to have a sense of comfort, familiarity, and wants you to be excited about getting to dive back into the world you know and love. And while the starts are similar in some ways, in other ways they couldn't be more different. And that's the video. If you want to be unknowable, difficult to interpret, and kind of clunky, then subscribe to the channel for all your poorly designed combat system needs. Thanks for watching, that's Mad Chill, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye!